I'm Midori Lockett from the Division of Government and Community Relations at Vanderbilt, and we are very excited to have you with us this afternoon. We originally planned this program back in March to happen during Women's History Month. And as all of you probably know, or are very much so aware of, March, everything turned topsy-turvy and things changed drastically for all of us. So we had to cancel that particular program, put it on hold. And fortunately, we were able to get all the panelists back on board with us this go round and to hold it virtually. So before we get started, I do have a little bit of housekeeping I want to share with all of you. I'm going to ask at this time for all of our panelists to unmute themselves. And then all of the rest of you will remain muted throughout the program. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the program where you will be free to ask questions during the program, but we ask that you ask them through the chat feature, please, in Zoom. And as we move forward, again, I just want to say thank you all for joining us. We're very much so looking forward to this conversation. And I will now introduce my colleague from Peabody, Hasina Mohyuddin, who has partnered with our office in community relations on this endeavor. And Hasina will welcome our panelists and have them introduce themselves. So thank you all very much, and we hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and a special thank you to all of our panelists for all the amazing work that they do and have done in the community and continue to do. And we are so excited for this conversation, and especially at this time as we think about everything that's going on in our world. And we are very excited to have Senator Roma Shagbari with us here today. Juliana Espano-Cano, Sabina Mohyuddin, and Charlene Oliver, and moderated by Andrea Blackman. And so I would love for each of our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Senator Akbari.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ramesh Akbari. I am a state senator from Memphis, Tennessee. I represent District 29, which includes downtown Memphis, South Memphis, Southwest Memphis, and even a more rural portion called Millington. Super excited to be here in the Senate. I serve on the Education, Ethics, Commerce, and Ag Committee. I've been in the legislature for the past 7 years, 2 years in the Senate, and 5 years in the House. Very excited to be on this panel. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Senator Akbari. And for all of our participants, if you'd like to click on Senator Akbari's video and hit those 3 dots, you can pin her video so you can make sure that she's at the top of your screen. I'd like to move to Juliana.
Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Juliana Ospina-Cano, and I'm the Executive Director at Conexión Americas, a local nonprofit based in Nashville. We're a statewide organization serving over 9,000 Latino and immigrant origin families in Tennessee. I'm also a first-generation American, and my first time voting was in 2016. So I'm thrilled to be able to vote in this upcoming election, and thank you so much for hosting us. It's really wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Sabina.
Hi, my name is Sabina Mohyuddin. Hasina is my sister-in-law. And so I am the executive director of the American Muslim Advisory Council. We're a statewide organization that works to empower the Muslim community. And by the way, I'm alumni of Vanderbilt. I graduated in 1993 with a degree in mechanical engineering. So I'm definitely not working in my degree field.
Thank you so much. And Charlene.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlene Oliver. I am the co-founder and co-executive director of the Equity Alliance. I'm also a Vanderbilt alum, class of 2005. Go Doors! For all those doors on the line, good to see you all. So the Equity Alliance, we're a nonprofit here. We're based in Nashville, but we do have a presence statewide, and we focus on civic engagement and racial equity issues that lead to economic opportunity. And primarily we focus on championing voting rights and the rights of civil rights that help make a more fair and equitable world for Black Americans. So.
Thank you so much. And we have Andrea Blackman, who I'm so excited to have moderate this conversation. Andrea?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here amongst all of these amazing women and all of our panelists today. I serve as the Division Director for Special Collections at the Nashville Public Library. Also have ties to Vanderbilt and Peabody, work with the Learning, Diversity, and Urban Studies program several semesters. Just excited to be a curator, part of a curation team to open a new Votes for Women space at the public library, and just happy to be here with everyone.
Thank you so much. And before I turn it over to Andrea, to kind of maximize people's experience, I might invite you to also turn off your video. And if you go to the stop video, there's an up arrow. If you click that in your video settings, you can actually hide non-video participants, and that's just going to let you look and see the panelists more easily. So I would invite you to stop your video, as well as to hide non-video participants, so that we can focus on the panelists and what they're saying. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And hopefully you can still see me because my screen just went blank. But there we go. I am so happy to get this conversation started. I'm going to begin before our panelists have an opportunity to join in. It's a sort of set of framework. You know, we are here today to have an amazing conversation, to not only look at 100 years of history and women of color and the role that we played in activism and mobilizing communities and changing policy, but we're also going to look forward. So before we can look forward, I think it's important for us to start by looking backwards at the past 100 years. And one of the questions I'll have for our panelists in just a few minutes is, what is left to be done? The work is not done, and who gets to carry that burden, particularly as a woman of color? So if we think about what were women of color doing over 100 years ago, as it relates to mobilizing communities, that's exactly what we were doing. Over 100 years ago, even before the passage of the 19th Amendment and the ratification of that, women of color, African-American women, were mobilizing their communities. They were working with their church organizations. They were working with local groups. They were petitioning the president to sign anti-lynching policy. So the idea of what women of color were doing as far as voting has a steep history. I want us to think about some of the things that particularly Black women were doing at the time. One of the things that we look at when we study in depth the ratification of the 19th Amendment, we look at the role that Black women played and white allies and white women played, and the role where that allyship fell. And so that's going to be second question for our panelists, to also think about the role of allyship as we move forward in this conversation. But what women were facing 100 years ago, they knew that they were facing institutions steeped in racism and steeped in elitism. And steeped in the entire system. That was the philosophy of the entire system, but many of them moved forward. And so today we honor, two voices, two amazing voices, Ida B. Wells and J. Frankie Pierce, and we think about the role that both of them played 100 years ago, both having roots in education, one being born 6 months after emancipation, the other one being born right after the Civil War, both fighting. And I want you to hear the words of Ida B. Wells's granddaughter and what her words said about her great-grandmother. So Michelle Duster is Ida B. Wells's great-granddaughter. And I think this will sum up what the women on our panel will present for us today. She said, Ida B. Wells did not allow herself to be marginalized or to be silenced. Even though she faced threats, she lost property, she endured criticism, she didn't stop. She refused to be silent. She refused to make herself small. She knew that she had to stand up, and she knew that she had to speak out. So we're talking about a woman who realized how money was being spent here 100 years ago with groups saying that they wanted the right to vote. And she went to London. She went to the source. She got on a boat, realized that the funding was coming from London for all of these suffrage movements. And so she's saying, let's be about the business. She got on a boat, went to London, and told the funders, well, this is what's going on in the States. People are just talking about action. They're just talking about movement. If you really want to know what's happening, let me be that voice. And so I'm so grateful that we have these 4 amazing women who's going to talk to us today, and their voices will help us edify and lift up the work that is still yet to be done. conversation. So if we are ready, I'm going to start with Senator. If it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. My first question for you is, when you think about, I think about Ida B. Wells, or I think about J. Frankie Pierce and education and advocacy. And you said what role you serve right now and have served in the past several years. Tell me about how you got interested in letting your voice be a platform as it relates to public education or just activism.
Certainly, definitely. And first of all, looking forward to this discussion with all the other panelists. Well, when I got to the legislature, or obviously when I decided to run for the legislature, a big part of my platform was education. Knowing that I attended public school from first grade through 12th grade, and knowing the power of having a good quality education and how it sets you up and facilitates really the rest of your life, the ability to read and comprehend and have analytical skills, all of that can lead you towards a career or a pathway that really helps you realize your true purpose. Now, for me, I wanted all kids to be able to have that. I felt like it didn't matter what part of the city you came from, what part of the state. You should go to a good public school and be able to get a good education. So when I decided to run for office, that was a part of my platform. Economic development and criminal justice reform were two other tiers that I focused on. But it's the key, really. If you look at any issue that if we have a position on, the more you know about the issue, the more you're educated on it, really, the more the more effective you will be as an advocate. And for me, it was not enough just to be involved. I felt like I could be involved in the community. I could achieve things in that way. But really being an elected official, being able to legislate, try to pass good legislation, try to stop bad legislation, I felt that was the best way for me to kind of be an advocate for my community. And I've continued to do it. Like I tell folks, like I won't leave until I'm no longer effective and I just don't enjoy it anymore, or the people vote me out, of course. But I think it's a great way to be able to advocate and to really move the needle forward on so many of the different issues we're facing.
Yeah, and one of the things, thank you so much, Senator. If we think about I'm going to continue to connect us to history and let history bridge us to where our role and our responsibility and our obligation, where we are now. And if we think about what's left undone and organizations that were founded, I'm going to move in what women were picking up and what mantles they were fighting for 100 years ago. I'm going to move to you next, Sabina. Talk to us a little bit about your perspective and what women of color bring to the table as it relates to voter impact or community engagement.
I think it's our organizing skills. It is really being able to reach out to community members and explain the importance of being engaged, not just for ourselves or our communities today, but for our children, for our future. And I think as women, like as you're raising your, for mothers, when you're raising your children, you're saying, and you see when they have the same struggles you had when you were a child, and you're like, wait, this can't be. This should not be. They should have something better. Why haven't things changed? And then you realize that it's not going to change unless I get out and do something. And sometimes, we have this expectation that they're leaders in the communities and we'll just go complain to them and expect change. And I think you get to the moment where if I don't get up and take action, if I don't do something, nothing's going to really change. And so I see with a lot of women just a frustration, why are things the way they are? What else can we do? And not waiting around for somebody else to come save us.
Yeah, thank you. Charlene, I think that's a perfect segue. Not waiting for someone else to come save us, not waiting for someone else to build up their organization. Talk to us a little bit about you're one of the co-founders and co-executive directors of Equity Alliance. Talk to us a little bit about what was the impetus for that? You weren't sitting around waiting for someone else to do it.
No, and I think Shirley Chisholm said it best. You know, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, or make your own table, and that's what we did. And that's what Black women do. I love Black women. My mentors are Black women. I mean, just women of color in general. We've had to be, we had to bring this innovation and ingenuity to the work of activism because we don't have a choice but to act. And that's sort of where I found myself in 2018 is, if not me, then who? Like, there are no Dr. Kings anymore. There are no more, Ida B. Wells, the greats who had to endure through lynchings and, domestic terrorism and the KKK. We don't necessarily have that today in the outwardly sense. I mean, it still exists, but for me, it was a combination of, seeing my people being killed by police, time and time after again. For me, it was Trayvon Martin. That was my political awakening to say, okay, I got to do something. And when it kept happening, it just further spurred this inner desire for me to want to do something. And those series of events also included the Flint water crisis and seeing a government that is supposed to be looking out for us and protecting us. They actually knew that they were poisoning their residents. It was seeing Dylan Roof kill 9 Black church members, but get served a hamburger afterwards. So his life seemed to matter more than these 9 folks that lost their lives. So for me, when the election of Donald Trump happens in November 2016, that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was like, okay, there's no more playing around, guys. Let's do something. We didn't have the blueprint. We didn't have elders in our ears saying y'all should start this organization. We didn't have national organizations saying here's some seed money, y'all go start this organization. It was sheer passion, seeing a need in our community, not seeing anyone else doing it, and saying, screw y'all, I don't care who's doing it, we're gonna bust down the door, and we arrived, we are here, we're gonna do it. And that's what we had going for us in the beginning. A lot of people, we did over 24 organizing events in that first year in 2017, actually in less than a year. And people would come to our events saying, man, y'all are doing the work. Y'all aren't just talking about it, y'all are being about it. And we pride ourselves on that today. And we just have to be about that action. Ida B. Wells, faced being run out of Memphis. And we have to face racism and white supremacy in its face and say no more. If not us, then who?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And one of the things you said about Ida B. Wells, being about it. One of my favorite journalists, she writes from Chicago. Her name is Sharonda Dawson. She said, Ida B. Wells, 2020, she did a boss move, right? And it's okay for us to refer to Ida B. Wells in those terms because that's who she was. That's who she is for so many of us who look at her history. But as you said, there's no more Dr. Kings. Who gets to pick up that mantle. So Juliana, let me hear from you. Talk to me about your perspective. What is needed as a woman of color for us to move this needle forward? Why should we even be considering if nothing is going to change? We hear young people say, why should I be mobilized? What do you think as a woman of color we bring to the table?
I would start by saying that it's great to have this conversation. I could see us hosting it at Casa Safran with Sabina and Charlene here now that we're sharing this space, right? Even though the building is closed, we're all working towards this better mission. And from the Latino and immigrant perspective, I can only speak from my own voice as a first-generation American who carries privilege by the color of my skin. The fact that I speak English and I'm an American citizen, but I also represent those that came before me and the families that we're having in the future that are going to be here to really see what we did in 2020, right? And that lack of silence and what does it mean when we don't show up. So when I think from my perspective and the perspective of these amazing women, is exactly what Sabina was saying, our ability to contextualize what it means when we have 30 million Latinos that are eligible to vote and they need to exercise that right if they want something to change. Here in Tennessee, the majority of Latinos are millennials, older millennials that ought to exercise that right if they want their communities to change. I'm very concerned, for example, with the census and the response rate, right? Some of the pieces that really change our community are so localized that if it's not Charlene or Sabina or myself telling the stories of what it means at the local level, then who is going to tell that story? When it comes to racial issues, if I don't sit at the table with my family members and discuss the issues that we have with race in our own countries, who is going to do that? This is the generation that can challenge history, right? And I am excited to know that there is a generation moving that needle, right? When I looked at the protests and here in Nashville in the rallies, I'm energized by the diversity that I saw. And I'm hopeful that those legs and those people marching translate into voting. But it's very difficult in a pandemic. As you know, we're an early voter site, and we all need to make a plan to make sure that we are able to vote safely, and also know who we're voting for. But again, I'm energized by women leading the cause and being very real about what's at stake. That's the difference between, I would say, men and women, that we can really talk, we can be real by really contextualizing what does it mean to be a woman in 2020.
Yeah. What does it mean to be a woman in 2020? I like that. That's a t-shirt right there, Charlene. So one of the things that I want us to think about is, so women of color were not, we're 100 years ago. They weren't just fighting for the right to vote. That was not it. That's what our history books, you said it's a new generation, right? And it's time for a new generation to rewrite history. So let's rewrite it and make sure that all of these marginalized voices, these voices of women in color, are actually given the same platform, which is what we're doing today. We're going to do that also in history. So what women of color were doing 100 years ago, they didn't care just about a single vote or a single election. Their greater good was about mobilizing and looking at how disenfranchised communities have been impacted by racial terror over years and years and years. And so when Ida B. Wells went to President Wilson and said, you've got to end discriminatory practices and hiring practices in governmental jobs, that was more than just one single act of voting in one election. I'm not minimizing what one vote will do for us in November, but what I am saying is it was so much bigger than that. Senator, talk to us about a bigger picture.
I didn't realize the headphones weren't plugged all the way in.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, sorry. No worries. Yeah, I mean, I think
about a bigger picture. Yes, beyond one vote.
I sure will. One, it's time for folks to truly recognize their power to run for office, okay? Like, you want to talk about making a change. Shirley Chisholm, like Charlene said, I mean, literally one of my role models, but she dared to be the first Black woman to be elected to Congress. She dared to be the first woman of color to run for the party nomination for president for a major party. You look at women like Barbara Jordan, or women like Marcia Fudge, women like women like Senator Kamala Harris, who is hopefully going to make history on November the 3rd. It's so much bigger than just one vote, and it's also bigger than an elected office. I'll say that too, because as a block of voters, you have the power to make tremendous differences. We have the power to make tremendous differences. Like, when I talk to younger people who simply don't want to vote, or they don't see the benefit, or they say, oh, my little vote is going to be thrown away, what's one vote? I bring it up. I said, listen, do you notice how people who are more seasoned get a lot more attention when it comes to elected officials? I said, that's because they are a guaranteed voting block. The things that are important to this generation, whether we're talking about actual equitable practices, recognizing that there are gross inequities from education to criminal justice laws, to the economy, to climate, to environmental justice, voting and being a block of people that push your issues, there's tremendous power there. And again, running for elected office. I ran for office when I was 29. I'm 36 and I'm the youngest member of the Senate. You can be 30 and run for the Senate. You can be 22 and run for the House. a lot of folks will say, well, what about if I did something local? Well, maybe I could just start with the school board. Just start with the school board. In Shelby County, the school board has a $1.2 billion budget. There's tremendous power there. There's tremendous ways to set policy and to really make sure that spending is equitable and that it's actually moving the needle forward. So, I mean, I think that as a collective group, our power is unlimited. Yet 2016 just knocked us all down. I remember just sitting in front of, I was actually on live television, and I remember just looking. There's actually a screenshot of me, and I'm just looking like, are you serious? I mean, I have my white suit on, my white and blue nails. I was like, Madam President all the way, and then woke up the next day and was like, good Lord, we have got to survive these next 4 years. And that's why I love Equity Alliance. I was on a panel for them and I said, please come to Memphis. But they are doing such a phenomenal job, really statewide. But it's more than just a movement. It's more than just a person. It's a movement. And we truly have the power the power that we think we need from others, we already have within ourselves. We just have to band together and make it happen.
More than a movement. Thank you. More than any of us, bigger than that. Sabina, you spoke earlier about being a parent and watching our children go through the same things that we had to go through and our grandparents before that. And we're talking about 100 years of history, and that's a lot of grandmothers who have gone through exactly what we're going through today. So Sabina, talk to us a little bit about, so 100 years ago, these women of color were saying, we're going to define our own issues. We are going to get to set the political agenda for ourselves as women of color. And it was different from the agenda of what white women were setting, trying to get the 19th Amendment, trying to get their right to vote. Sabina, talk to us a little bit about what it means to actually set and identify your own political agenda, what it means for you and your community.
Exactly. As a Muslim, year after year, we watch, what's going on in the political arena. And really, our issues are not being addressed. And so, the Muslim community is only being addressed in terms of security, whether we can be partners to bring more security in terms of terrorism, Muslim ban, and so for us to bring out and say, hey, we are more than just, a security threat or whatnot. We are a community that's living here. We're working. We're worried about economic equity. We're worried about education, and we're worried about services and policing in our community. So how do we bring that out in the forefront, especially when, since 9/11, all the conversation was pinpointing us and pigeonholing us in terms of security? And how do we really lift up our voices and say, we should be advocating for ourselves. We cannot wait for someone else to step up and speak to these issues. We have to speak up for it ourselves. In 2011, there was an anti-Sharia bill in the state legislature. And I think that is what really mobilized the Muslim community in Tennessee. And it was great because it was led by women. Back to the question, it was led by women who understood that if we are not civically engaged and not just as a response to something happening, but working strategically on these issues, that others are just going to walk all over us. And they've done it over and over again. So for us as a community, telling us if we're not speaking loudly, clearly, proudly, nobody's going to hear us. And it's not just voting. It's meeting elected officials. It's knowing the issue. It's advocating when you can. It's organizing within the community so you have a stronger, united voice. And you're not just kind of all over the place. So, I think for us, and our issues are not Muslim specific. It's, because we still want education equity. We need more resources in the education system. We need job equity. Racism is affecting our community. So, and kind of tying that all with our community members to understand that these issues are all one and the same, and we need to be fighting against it.
Yeah. I see all of our panelists shaking their heads. I think we all are in total agreement with that. And so, Charlene, I want to come to you next with, you can either piggyback off of that, or I do have another question also for you. When you think about women of color and how 100 years ago, Black women were used as political pawns to get certain votes. Not necessarily following their own agenda that they had set or determined what were the needs of their own communities, not just following a history of voting the same way their fathers and husbands did, but saying this is what's important to us. So if you don't mind, I would love to hear your thoughts on this idea of Black women and women of color being viewed as political pawns just to get the vote. I know you love the question. I see your face.
I mean, this still happens today. Black women in the social hierarchy is viewed as like, we have two strikes against us. We're Black and we're women, and we have to we're forced to either choose to advocate for our Blackness or our womanhood. But no other person in society has that, has to do that. And I hate that, we had to get piggybacked onto a movement that only benefited white women at the time, but we knew that there was going to be something in it for us. For us, and you mentioned something earlier, I forgot what it was, about Black women. I forgot what it was, but my point on that is, when you said Ida B. Wells was advocating for to the government, and it's like, we are wanting our humanity to be seen. For Black women and women of color, we want our humanity to be seen, and we know that in order to do that, we have to change these systems and policies that oppress our humanity. And in order to do that, we have to vote. And so that vote is so much tied to who we are as people and being seen as full citizens in this country. And so we fight for that so much more harder than say the white voter or the male voter, because we know there's so much at stake tied into that vote. And I say this all the time, is that vote is the one place that we know we're equal. Everyone has that same equal vote, and it's in the ballot box. So for Black women, that's why we ride so hard for it. That's why we're the most reliable voting bloc in this country. We know we're going to show up. We know what's at stake, and we know how to recognize the bullshit. Excuse my language, but Black women know how to snuff out bull. So when you want to know who to vote for, follow Black women's lead.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've had to snuff out the bull since the beginning of this country.
Yeah, so that is going to take me a trajectory that I didn't want to go, but I'm going to go there since you brought it up. I was reading an article. It was an article, and Midori and I were talking about this just yesterday. This article that was saying that Black women now, and I saw it all over Twitter, all of these bleeding heart people writing in on Black Twitter saying, please, 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 as a voting bloc, Black women and women of color, we need you. You're going to save us. I have to ask you, because we can't talk about activism, civic engagement, and carrying the burden, whether politically in office or in our communities, what all of us are doing collectively and individually. We can't do that without talking about the trauma that comes with that to women of color. And so the trauma of what the responsibility, this idea now that the country thinks that the burden is only on us. Yes, we are a huge voting bloc, but let's talk just for a few seconds, if you don't mind, Charlene, and anyone else who wants to jump in after that, the burden that comes along with that, of that slow grade trauma, as if we can save the entire world and country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that belief is rooted in this idea that Black women are mammies, and we had to literally nurse the generations of slave masters and their children. And so in order for them to thrive, they had to depend on the Black women to nurture them. And so that same sort of mentality is still rooted in how Black women have to save the day. But we didn't create these problems. We didn't. And so we shouldn't, the brunt of the problem should not be placed on Black women. We're doing what we're supposed to do. How about y'all go talk to the 53% that caused this problem, the 53% of white women who vote for patriarchy, and they follow the leads of their husbands. And we know that the husbands are voting for, I don't want to say his name, but we need to talk about that. Talk to your cousins, talk to your sisters, and the folks in the suburbs who are thinking about voting for hatred. So it's unfortunate that we have to always, again, be the ones to swoop in and save the day, like we did in Alabama and so many other elections.
Yeah, and not just here in the States, right? We're talking about global, what women of color have done. Sabina, I see you're unmuted. You want to chime in there on that slow grade burden? Like, why do women of color always have to carry the burden to save an entire world and to save an entire country? Not that we can't put on our superwoman capes. That's not the issue. The issue is it's a burden, and we shouldn't carry the burden ourselves. And it is deep rooted in a long history, as you mentioned earlier. Sabina, I see you're unmuted. Jump on in.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's I think it goes to patriarchy in terms of women have so many roles, and they're expected to do all the roles perfectly, and so the expectation is to take the lead or and then take the fall when things are not going the way it should be, and it becomes their fault. Kids are not doing well, you know, what is the mother doing, you know? And we just have to get out of that and really look, and what Charlene was saying, looking at the 53% of white women whose votes, you know, went towards upholding that patriarchy and the racist structure. And why are we asking them? And that burden that, you know, women of color have to always answer, and you're always, you know, whether it's just women or just minority groups, the burden is always on you, and everyone's staring at your vote as if somehow you're going to change the election, and not looking at the majority whose theirs is really the ones that is problematic.
Yeah. Juliana, jump on in here. Juliana, I know I see you ready and unmuted yourself. This is our conversation. You all don't have to wait for me to call your name. Come on in here, Juliana.
No, I was just thinking about the burden, and at least from the Latino immigrant perspective, when your whole existence is constantly being questioned every single day, when you go out and when you see in the news from the Muslim ban, DACA, caps on visas, Mexicans, the way they were being labeled, public charge, right? When every day your own existence is being threatened, right? And seen as the other. And we see all these women, that all of us having to negotiate, right? What does it take to really own our identity while we're also protecting our own children from the external things that they're going to face when they go to school, when they get pulled over by the police, right? When they're not having their passport with them, when they speak English with an accent, let alone if they don't speak English. The fact that immigrant origin children and families were left out of the CARES Act in a pandemic, like what does that say about our country and the individuals that we value? So when you have to wrestle, right, and also take care of your home, my light also, take care of your home and your people, but at the same time, navigate a very difficult system. The United States is not a unitary system. And if it wasn't for the Equity Alliance's voter guide that I took to my home, and I sat down with my mom and my dad and I said, okay, aquí se vota así. This is how we vote in Tennessee. This is the structure. It's different from Virginia. It's different from DC. It's different, right? That's what it takes in order to mobilize our families. It's a family conversation, but it's not an easy process. The fact that you can vote early, the fact there are different elections, and the fact that every county, every district is different. The fact that my child is getting an education based on my zip code is also very difficult for us to understand when we come from countries where there's a unitary system, where you know what you're voting for, and it's exactly the same across the board. So yes, there are this, I think, is the battle for survival every single day. Second, understanding a very complicated system, and also knowing that the messages that we're getting is that we are not welcome in this country, that our language, the way we dress, the way that we behave are constantly questioned, when in reality, the majority of our kids are born here, right? So it is a matter of having these conversations, taking those guides and taking it to our parents, our primos, our family members, saying, if you live in Tennessee, if you live in Nashville, this is what is at stake. See all those faces? They don't look like us. They don't sound like us. We need to run for office to make sure that there's representation there. But before we get there, we need to understand the system, because it's not easy to navigate. Here at CASA, we get so many families that come into the building, and you should see, they put on their best clothes. This is them voting, many for the first time and coming to this building. And even though we can't, of course, guide them, it's an honor for us to have a space that is welcoming, that says, yes, you're valued, we see you, come on in, you can vote and exercise your right. It's just magical, but it's not an easy process. And it takes all of us, all these amazing women and organizations working together and say, this is not working for the future of the state and the country. I'm going to turn on the light, excuse me.
Go ahead. No, thank you. Thank you. Senator, do you want to chime in on that question before I go on to the next one?
Certainly, I just agree with everything that everyone has said. And I do think that it is a burden, but it's one that we've always seen. Again, like when I got to the General Assembly, there's these little microaggressions that and actually just outright, like, oh, you're going to change what it means to be from folks who are from Memphis. Memphis is code word for Black. Oh, you're so well spoken. Oh, I had no idea that you knew this. And I'm thinking, we're on the Judiciary Committee. I'm an attorney. Why would I not know this? And so what I've done is, one, I think there's an opportunity to explain. Again, there's that burden if people are really willing to listen, but at the same time, if they're not, and you can discern it, you kind of kick back to them and say, so are you. And it's like, oh, wow, okay. So we're all well spoken up in here. But I definitely agree. I mean, you look at folks working behind the scenes, you look at Ella Baker and the organizational things that she did. You look at Dr. Dorothy Height, who was there and a part of the March on Washington, but wasn't allowed to speak. Black women are carrying the mantle. Women of color are carrying the mantle. And I'm actually, quite frankly, I think Alabama highlighted it, because folks were like, no, it's enough for people being behind the scenes. It's enough of us from rescuing these situations. So we're at least talking about it. I don't think people were even talking about it. Yes, it's exhausting, okay? It just is. But at the same time, I know that it is for something better. And I'm hoping that future generations, future young ladies, future folks will not have to deal with this as they move forward into their own greatness.
So I have to ask another question, and this one comes from our one of our viewers, one of our amazing audience participants. They have a question, and I think it's absolutely dovetails where we are. So not only are we carrying the voting block and knowing who we are as women of color, can we just talk for a few minutes about the burden that is put upon women during this pandemic, when more women are leaving the workforce to take care of their children, plus their parents and older generation? So the question is, do you think women will rebound in the workplace after a vaccine has come? Think about how many of us have already had to leave jobs and stay at home. I want to hear from each of you on this question. So I'll start with Juliana. Let me start with you. What do you think the burden is on women during this pandemic?
Well, what I have in the back and in this whiteboard is the number of families that we've served since March, the number of boxes of food that we distribute in partnership with many other organizations here, over 5,000. The money that we were able to give out, but it's mainly single women, is mamas, women making the sacrifice and negotiating. What does it mean to go to work and rescuing my life? What does it mean to ask for a day off when I know that my child doesn't have access to broadband and we only have one cell phone for the entire family to do your homework? That is real. That is real. And what does it mean when we have these myths about mask wearing? There was an anecdote that stayed with me, and I get a little emotional, but we have our campaign of wearing masks. And then we kept hearing from parents that they were saying, I'm afraid of wearing my mask because they think that I have COVID-19. So instead of being seen as people that were protecting one another, in some communities, wearing a mask was perceived as the opposite, right? So when I think about what we're seeing now and how this disproportionately continues to impact Black and immigrant origin families, we have a lot of work to do as a society. I'm also very concerned about the disparities that now parents and moms are very scared of even going to the doctor, and how that is going to continue to widen the gap. Immunizations, checkups, cancer screenings, right? What is that going to do for our generation, our little kids, our kids in the years to come? And it's not until we actually look at these inequities to provide access for families, family paid leave, right? The fact that election day is not a holiday, right? All these things, it's gonna be really hard to turn things around. For us who are in this panel, and I'm just assuming, it's very easy, right, to make assumptions. But for the families who we've been helping, those negotiations are quite difficult when you're trying to figure out if by leaving my house, I'm gonna be able to come back again, or I'm putting my family, multi-generational households in jeopardy. So I am hopeful in the sense that we're finally seeing these inequities that the country and the state have seen for years, but we're finally talking about them because they're palpable. But at the same time, it takes change in policy, change in advocacy in order to really save women and moms for generations to come.
Thank you. And I think you said changing policies and all this. And I think one of you said earlier, it might have been you, Charlene, or it might have been you, Senator, the idea of changing our perspective and just being human and the humanity of it all. And so, Sabina, what's that burden after this pandemic? How are we as women of color going to fare if we're leaving our jobs and having to teach children? Talk to us a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because some community members I'm seeing that where women just stayed home, were stay-at-home moms, and now their husbands have lost their job, their income has gone down, and they're starting to think, wait, I wish I could help out at this time. And for some people, it's a different conversation. Like, what could I have done? How could I have been more active? Of course, the opportunities there are limited. And, we're talking about so many of our community members being essential workers. And we're realizing, like, we want to make sure our community members go beyond those essential worker jobs, because that's really been driving some of these health inequities, because as the pandemic was roaring away, people were still having to go to work in our communities. And that's, you saw in South Nashville, in the Antioch, Murfreesboro, Pike, Nolensville, Pike areas, that those were COVID hotspots. And, the city officials kept coming back to us and asking, like, why? And Juliana, has, says a lot about it. And just, it's because these are communities that are essential workers. And I want things to change going forward in terms of people looking beyond, especially women looking beyond just those essential working jobs, and having more of a career and being able to pull themselves out of that poverty.
Thank you. I think it was also said when we were looking at the current trends and locally hotspots in the Southeast Davidson corridor, and what contributed to that shift is also who was giving the messaging, right? So you turn it over to people in communities who look like people in communities who can convey the message, and many of them were women conveying the message, and look what we have now as it relates to the hotspots. Thank you. Charlene.
Yeah, so that's a good segue into an initiative that we just rolled out, or we're doing for the past 2 months, the Our Fair Share initiative for the city of Nashville. We did a needs assessment and went into the top 12 COVID hotspots to look at how the pandemic was really impacting communities of color. And what we found, and you can go to ourfairsharenash.com to read that report that we just released a few days ago. But Sabina's kind of hit on it already. But the glaring sort of thing that came out of that report for me is that particularly communities of color, who a lot of us are our households are run by women, single women, and we're fighting 3 pandemics, actually. We were already fighting the pandemic of racism, where for over 400 years, we've been fighting white supremacy as Black folks. Muslim folks are dealing with Muslim bans and things like that. Hispanic, Latino community, our kids are being caged at the border, and we're dealing with that. But then the other pandemic of poverty has already been hitting our community. The unemployment rate in Nashville for Black Nashvillians was already at 24%. So when you add on the third pandemic of COVID, it just exacerbated all of those different things. And now we're dealing with all of those things all at once. And so I do worry about how do we come out of this pandemic and bounce back. We may not have jobs to go back to. And so it has called for us to pivot and really look at how do we be, again, innovative and really change the way we've always done things. But it also has called for us to look at policy, and are these policies truly working for people, working class people and people of color? And we see that they are not. The government is having a hard time responding in the way that it needs to be. And thank you, Ramesh, for being on the State Financial Oversight Committee for the CARES Act to make sure that those resources are getting into the right hands. But unfortunately, we still have a lot of work to do in that. And I'm afraid that we won't have jobs to go back to, and we may not have homes to go back to, and we might be put into a recession if we aren't already headed that way.
I wanted to add something, because the Our Fair Share initiative is great, because I think all of us, Charlene and Juliana, have noticed, like, one of the problems in Nashville is that where the resources allocated and who is giving out the resources. And so during the pandemic, there were women who reached out to me who were saying, well, yeah, the school's giving food, but it's not the food we eat, so I'm not getting it, like, I don't want to waste it. What I realized is that, like, Muslim community members were more likely to go reach out to a Muslim organization, and there's only one besides the mosque. There aren't many in Nashville, and for help. And having that trusted community member organization to go out to. And so, like, making sure that when we give these rent assistance and utility assistance, that it's going to local organizations who are on the ground, who have relationships with people. And that's like what Conexión Americas is doing. Like, has already relationships with people, then people are more likely to go and get that help and financial assistance. They're just not going to go to an organization that they see no connection with.
Yep.
And what I would like to add is, Charlene, you all deserve praise, medals, hugs, virtual hugs for what you did. So to give a very specific example of, okay, we say, how do we disseminate this survey in a way that families are going to answer the questions, but feel comfortable and safe answering questions about their own communities, because we know there's a lot of mistrust in the community with anything that asks for your data and your information, especially for Latino immigrants in the United States. And when we saw moms physically distancing here at Casa Azafran, filling out the survey, and for us to know that they were participating, and now seeing the data illuminate and guide policy and decisions that are going to, in turn, be money and investments for the city. Like, what a wonderful example, right, of how one scrappy organization, right, Charlene, and all of us has said, we need to change the system. So the message that I think all of us need to take from that, the Equity Alliance and all of us, is that it doesn't take much other than determination, partnerships, ganas, a lot of, I would say, community behind you to actually make a change, right? Is that phone call, that text message, pushing really hard and bringing other people together, because what they have done is really bring the resources back to the community with authentic voices. And for us, bringing the Spanish-speaking community along the way in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, that's what it's about. It's about relationships. It's about having relationships with community partners to get work done, but it's also from a policy standpoint, making sure that policymakers are still attached to everyday folks so that they understand the issues that they're, writing legislation about. So absolutely, it's all about that relationships and having those organizations really connect the people to your policymakers. And the Equity Alliance, we do that pretty well.
Yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit to Ramesh. One of the questions that came in was, so beyond the idea of what we are all doing in our homes with our family, what do we do beyond our homes and our family? What do we do to actually make sure, from a policy standpoint, what can each of us do to help as relates to reducing voter suppression?
Well, the most important thing is vote. My advice is a little different than it would be if we were not in this COVID crisis that we're in, because for me, I feel like directly well, you can still do it actually, just not in person. It'll be more of a virtual world, but directly connect with your elected officials. One, they work for you. Tax dollars pay for their salaries, no matter how small they may be. And they also are expecting your vote when the time comes around. Reach out to your elected officials, explain to them what your thoughts are, and have coalitions. When you have a block of people from a neighborhood that says, hey, we don't like XYZ, or we want you to have a town hall on XYZ, that makes some noise as opposed to just individually doing it. But focus on an issue, right? So like, let's see, there was a community in my district, they were thinking about putting some sort of garbage dump in the community. Okay, so we came together on multiple levels, from state, local, even school board members got involved. And that's because the neighborhood association reached out to us, made us aware, and we were able to activate. But there's so many, like I have 190,000 constituents. So it's not like I can keep up with every single person. But when people are reaching out to me, I certainly can respond. There are websites, your local election commission in Memphis, I don't know in Nashville, unfortunately, but it's shelbyvote.com. You can put your address in. It will tell you who your elected official is on every single level, whether we're talking about school board, county commission, city council, or you're elected in federal. So I think that's a big thing. And then also look at existing groups, right? Like Moms Demand is one of the most powerful groups, simply because they refuse to back down from these awful gun bills that the legislature tries to push. And there's power in that. Not only do they have local chapters, they have national chapters. Or if you're looking at education issues, there are groups that are dedicated specifically to strengthening our public schools. So look at ways to get involved. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but make sure that you have an active role. I really think that's what it is. Like, it's the people's house. Every government building is the people's house. And when you look at certain, especially, I can only again speak for Memphis, but you'll go to a city council meeting and you'll see certain neighborhoods very active. And in that case, they have a seat at the table. They're not on the menu. And it's important that when these decisions are being made, we show up. I know it's hard because you're just trying to survive. You're trying to balance working and your family and everything else, and throw a pandemic and an economic recession on top of it. And I'm not going to say it, but just all the craziness that comes out of Washington. I wanted to say something a little more aggressive, but I'm not going to do that. It's hard to kind of piece through it, but just piece by piece. And I say, start with social media. Most elected officials have a Twitter or Facebook page, and you'd be surprised when you write a comment, how quickly people respond. And I'll say one more thing, and this is important. You might not like the person's issues, but you don't have to directly attack the person, because elected officials are people too. And they are the same way, like I try to attack issues, not people. Of course, now, you know, we can do what we need to do when we have to do it. But I think approaching from that perspective often gets you an answer a lot faster too. When you really want to just cuss them out, instead say, hey, this is an issue. These are what's going on. This is what's going on in my neighborhood. You're my elected official. We need your help, you know?
Yeah. Thank you. I noticed several people, several of you were adding things to chat, and several of the answers are coming through for our attendees, and I appreciate that. Thank you for the links of how do we get to know our representatives, who's representing us. That's one thing we do, and listing all the organizations and the voter guide. It's all in chat, everybody. Here's a unique question that I would love for you all to, and I know we're getting close. We're a little bit over 4 o'clock, and I'll turn it back over to Vandy, I promise. They know what happens when they give me the mic as well. So here's another question for you. I think this is a great question. What do we do about the communities that don't want to be reached? What do we do about those communities who are inherently impacted, but are compartmentalized with or without getting any information? What do we do about the ones that don't want to be reached? How do we, you know, there's this idea of maybe they're not impacted or what, or they're getting whatever type of information. What do we do for those communities? We can handle our own communities. How do we go beyond that?
Well, I'd say meet people where they are. You don't have to throw this event and expect people to come to it, but go directly into the neighborhood. We've done that with some voter registration things. Just if there's a community event, I think that's what you mean, or in case you mean people who simply do not feel like it's important to have compromise and dialogue. Now, if that's the case, goodness, that's my everyday in the General Assembly sometimes for me. So again, I try to find issues that I know are important. Public schools and criminal justice reform has been one that I've been able to get folks to buy in on. Now, if I want to talk about guns or women's choice, non-starter, right? So I find focus on what you can agree on, try and get what you can. And I'm not saying this like get the crumbs. I don't mean that. I mean, think about progress and change as incremental until you can change your scenario. And that's what I have to do. I have to deal with the cards that I'm dealt, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to play a hell of a hand with it. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that?
Well, I think in the Muslim community, I mean, we have our unique issues. So sometimes there's religious barriers. Some people just think religiously they shouldn't be voting because some of the moral stances on issues that they disagree with the candidates. And they say, well, it's better not to vote. And so these are long-term conversations. It's not, you know, you're not going to open a voter registration booth in front of them and get them. It's conversations that have to happen from different angles. And we've been working really hard with that with the mosques. But it's also getting community members to understand, you know, what foreign politics is, foreign affairs versus what's local, and that all politics is local, and that's what really is affecting you day to day. So that's voter education piece about it. And then just we know, and studies have shown that when Muslim community members actually meet elected officials or candidates, then they're more likely to vote. Because otherwise you live in your community and you have all these stereotypes, or you think you know everyone, you think you know, like Senator Akbari said, like they're humans, you know, whether you agree with the politics of your elected officials, at the end of the day, they're human. And when you have human conversations, it kind of changes your attitude. And then you think about maybe you can see working together on something. And just the idea of strategizing. It's not about the particular candidate at the moment, but it's a long-term strategy. And so, like, you know, a lot of our community members, not all, are immigrants. And immigrants, they kind of come in and they're just thinking about the moment, what's happening. They're just responding to attacks, and they're not really thinking of the long-term strategy and how you get to where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Long-term strategy. I think that is perfect for one of my last questions. I know we'll run out of time, but one of my last questions I have for each of you is to think beyond a single vote you know, and as our women who we are honoring today, and the legacy of J. Frankie Pierce and Ida B. Wells and so many other amazing women of color, beyond a single vote, beyond a single election, if you had to identify an issue and to what is left to be done beyond November, what must we do? What does that look like? Beyond November, what do we have to do? Beyond the pandemic, what is it that you would think? And this is your opinion. I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me start from you, Charlene, and then I'll make my way through. What's left to be done beyond one single vote, beyond one, and we know that there's no one single vote, one election. What is to be done after November? What must we do collectively?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Equity Alliance, we don't focus on one single election. We focus on building power. It's about the long term, like Sabina said, it's about the long-term strategy of how do we build a stronger coalition of folks who are in our electorate and making this an inclusive process so that democracy can work. Democracy works best when everyone gets to participate. So yes, Ida B. Wells and J. Frankie Pierce, they didn't live long enough to see their impact of being able to vote, but it eventually happened. And so we have to believe in a higher moral arc, that the arc of justice is going to bend, and we'll see that light of day. And so I think for me, the work is going to always be there. We have to continue to pass the torch. And there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of fights to be had and not enough firefighters, like lots of fires to put out right now. You take your pick. And we need everyone on this call to be in the game. We can't rely on just the few activists who are on the front lines or in the newspaper headlines to do all the work. We're tired. We are tired of always fighting these fights by ourselves. It's going to take everyone. And so we have to keep our eye on the prize, on the long game, to make sure that it's not about just casting that ballot on November 3rd. It's about what happens afterwards. And we have to remember to hold our elected officials accountable, even the ones that we don't agree with, or the ones we do vote for. Even if we vote for that person, we have to hold them accountable to what they promised us on the campaign trail, and continue to read the newspaper, continue to show up to school board meetings, council meetings, to the state legislature, writing your congressman. All of those things is a part of what democracy is about. We have to make sure that we're participating. So yeah, there's plenty of fights. I won't give a laundry list. Pick one and hone in on it.
Yeah, thank you. Juliana.
Yeah, it was just,
what do we do?
Well, echoing everything that Charlene was saying, but this is the most diverse generation, and the generations that are going to come after us. So just thinking about that, the repair that they're going to have to do, just think about climate change, right? All the things that they're going to have to fix if we don't start doing that work right now. So when I think about the future, is making sure that we hold the front, right? And allow individuals and youth to come after us. And also to recognize that, in 1965, they were having this conversation. It is 2020, and we're still having the same conversations where people are scared of going to vote, and even more in a pandemic. So if we are not talking about these issues and what does it mean for us to vote today, I just worry about the generations to come. But again, the world is changing. We're having this conversation, and as Charlene said, we need all of you. Choose your whatever battle you want to choose with us. We cannot do it alone. There's plenty to do. You know how to find us. And we're here to say, come on board. We'll join you on Zoom. We'll email you what you need to do, and just make sure that people feel safe and comfortable voting, especially women in this upcoming election.
Sure. Thank you. Sabina.
Yes. So, what Charlene said about, this is not about just, am I frozen?
We can still hear.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, so this is not just about one election. This is about voter engagement and civic engagement throughout the year. And, when you think about issues, it is ultimately white supremacy. And that is affecting us, racism, Islamophobia, you know, our education system, policing, everything is affected by it. And so we usually see community members complain when something happens directly to them, but it's like, no, you can't just react. You've got to be proactive. And that means every day engaging and you know, what Charlene said about building power. You know, you have to build it one block at a time. And that takes working every day on this issue. And we need more people on board doing it, because it cannot be the same faces and the same people over and over again.
Thank you. And lastly, Senator.
Certainly, I think, I mean, one, I view every election day as just a beginning, especially when you have folks who are newly elected or reelected. Then begins the time of the work and to hold them accountable. But I think it's important as we move forward and we face some of the greatest issues we've really ever faced, from a global pandemic to usually there's time to ramp up to a recession or depression, and we were immediately thrust into one. And kind of what that looks like for different communities, how much more severe it is, and how it has kind of really magnified the inequities that have already existed. I think that once we move beyond this, we have to hold on to that information and to our collective power to change it. Like, it can't be like, oh, okay, Donald Trump's not in office anymore, we're good. Oh, we got a vaccine, we're good, let's go back to normal. No, we can't go back to normal, because normal did not work for so many people. And it's important that we recognize it and we don't forget it. And we have to keep moving forward. It is heavy, it is tiring, it is exhausting. And that's where allies come in. That's where it's important for those who have a seat at the table, who have more, who have an opportunity, who have the experience, who have the network, who have the ability to actually reach across and help others. And I don't want to say reach down, because we're all on the same level. But if you have more, I mean, I was just raised this way inherently, that you are expected to do more. But I certainly think that this is valuable for those who are allies, who have been able to benefit from privilege. I mean, who have been able to benefit from a society that had 400 years of free labor and was able to build a completely capitalistic system based on not paying labor. I mean, come on. And then 100 years of oppression, even more so, and paying inequitable wages. Now is the time, if not now, then when, to step up, to recognize privilege. It's not a bad thing. It's something that you should feel bad about, but just recognize that it exists and that you have the opportunity to try and create equity. And it's not just about you. And so that's all I'll say.
Thank you. I think my charge would be for any ally to look at, you know, through the lens of what Ida B. Wells said. You know, let's make whatever attempts that you say in private, like, let's make those attempts public as well. Let's go. And so for us, that's going beyond a hashtag, going beyond all those additional things that you said, right? We must continue, because it doesn't stop. You know, women 100 years ago, they were burdened, but they were also facing poll taxes. They were also facing their husbands being lynched in front of them and their stomachs being ripped out and babies being, you know, being lynched. They were also facing supremacy at one of our country's darkest times. And so nothing is new. Juliana said nothing is new since 65, nothing is new since 1944, and nothing is new since the beginning of time. But what must continue is each of us doing what we're doing. And the call that you all gave us, you gave us a collective call of where we all stand as people of color, as allies, as women of color, to continue to carry on this mantle. And so I want to personally thank you on behalf of the 200 folks that tuned in with us, that saw us either on Zoom or Facebook Live, or however many hundred people. And I want to personally thank you, number one, for your work and your dedication to continuing to fight and carrying on the legacy that so many women of color have put on their backs, and now they have passed it on. Injustice isn't a new thing for us, but the way that each of you have decided to craft your own niche in fighting that fight is inspiring. So thank you on behalf of all of the attendants. We stand with you, we stand behind you. And you're right, Charlene said, we're just tired. Like, some people get tired. It shouldn't be the same old faces. You know, when after November, we shouldn't see these same faces that I'm looking at right now, the only ones that are out there fighting. So on behalf of everyone that's listening in, thank you for your ongoing work. And thank you for inspiring us to continue to do the work. And I'll give you applause. I'm sure you can see the many faces. We can clap for you. I know they're muted, but I thank you, and I sincerely thank you. We all have to be committed to change if we're going to see a change. So with that said, I will turn the program back over to our amazing host, Hasina. I think it's back up to you. Thank you all, each of you, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I'll come back as Asina joins us.
Doing
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. It was an invigorating, exciting, interesting conversation and discourse. Made me think about a lot of things that I do already think about on a daily basis, but made me get reacquainted. I am honored to know of all of you and the work that you're doing and applaud all of that hard work. And just invigorated and very excited. So on behalf of Vanderbilt and the Division of Government and Community Relations, I want to thank you all for taking your time this afternoon to participate and join us. I have entered into the chat email address where folks, if they have additional questions after the fact or just want to provide feedback to us for this program, that they can send that information in. And if something should come in that specifically relates to any of your organizations, we'll be sure to pass it on to you. Thank you all again so very much. And on that note, I will ask Hasina if she has some final parting words that she'd like to add as well. But I just want to say on behalf of our division and all of the great work that you all do, we partner with all of you. So I am familiar with your organizations and the great work, but I just want to applaud you all. And again, also thank my dear friend, Andrea, and the great work that she's doing at the library for your input and your engagement. So thank you very much. And Hasina, if you're still available, if you'd like to join us again, you can sign off as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all for being here. I can't tell you how much we appreciate all of you for this conversation. And this is just such an important time for all of us to be thinking about being civically engaged and what that means to us in our community. So I really appreciate all of you for this conversation. I also want to let everybody know that this session was recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording after we have it edited. But the Facebook Live link is also available, and I'll put that web address. You can find it there. But again, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and we appreciate all that you have done again and continue to do, and look forward to partnering with you and fighting the fight alongside all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Gracias. Thank you.